Good evening, everyone. We are kicking it off in a couple of minutes. Yeah, so maybe if you have friends in the cafe, please get them, fetch them. Don't take that one personal, please. Yes, welcome everyone. We are about to start, so please fetch all your friends from the cafe. They can bring their drinks if they want. There's a couple of seats in the front here, so please make sure they don't remain vacant. It looks so uneven. We'd like an even distribution here. Over there, there's like 5 seats over there. A couple of them over here. All right. What time is it? Time. That's what I would like to hear. All right. Welcome everybody at the winter party edition of AmsterdamJS, Amsterdam's largest and longest running JavaScript meetup. But more importantly, it's not only the largest and longest running meetup of the city, it's also the JavaScript meetup that is completely community based. Everything you see here is real. There's no hidden agenda. There's no corporate interest. The only reason I'm here is because I like to do something back after being active in the Amsterdam ecosystem for many years. And I think I love this city and it deserves a nice community, a nice ecosystem. I believe that JavaScript has the future. Mark Andreessen says software is eating the world. Well, I would like to add JavaScript is eating the software. So let's kick it off. I'm Tim. I'm a co-founder partner at an internet company here in Amsterdam. It's called Startup Studio Neskia. We started like 10 years ago before the word startup even existed. We had a different name back then. We do a couple of startups. Go check them out if you're interested. If you like startups, come talk to me. We can always use some nice people to work with. But of course, I'm not doing it by myself. First of all, we have Robert and Dennis. Dennis is not here tonight, I think, but Robert is over there in the corner. You all probably know him because he's a very active organizer here in town. Give it up for Robert. And then, of course, we have our sweet, cute Fireside chat hosts. They're called Nikolai and Rick, but I would like to call them Nick and Rick. Give them an applause. I'm not sure where they are. In the back, yes. I will further introduce them to you later. Like every edition, we are live streaming this event. That's what the good man in the corner is doing right now. Maybe a little bit of an applause for this man doing the live streams every event. Thank you, thank you. And of course, we are going to record them and cut them into separate talk videos and upload them afterwards. So keep an eye on our YouTube channel. That's also where you can find the live stream, by the way. So, of course, we couldn't have done this, nice venue, nice catering, nice lineup, without companies supporting us. First of all, we have Evolution Gaming. They are specialized in making 3D WebGL games, which could look a bit like this one, just to give you an idea. They also use a lot of React and Redux, so if that's your thing, go check them out. And then special shout out to Bluefront, who has been supporting us for, I don't even remember since when, since forever. It's a great place for front-end devs to work in small informal teams for big corporate projects. So if that's your thing, go talk to Jasper. Is Jasper where's Jasper? Yeah, he's over there. Go talk to him. Nice person from Bluefront. Or just have a look at their website. Big thanks to Bluefront. So before I move on to today's schedule, as many of you may know, we did our first conference last year, earlier this year actually, in the spring, in June. It was a very nice one, but we already promised it to make it better and bigger this year or next year in 2018. So tonight we figured would be a nice opportunity for us to do the official announcement. I'm not going to do it right now. I'm just going to tease you right now a little bit. We're going to do it right before the break, so keep an eye on that. We will launch an extremely limited batch of super early bird discount tickets. So if you definitely want to be there and want to attend at the lowest possible price, this is your opportunity, exclusive to our Meetup members. Because, of course, we love you more than anyone. Then one thing. One of the goals of the meetups that we do has always been to provide a stage for beginning speakers. Because, I mean, there's so many great tech speakers out there, but everyone needs to start at some point and take a leap of faith and just go up, step up stage and just give it a shot. And we understand that it's not automatically the easiest thing to do. But at the same time, it's a pity that there are so many people out there also in this crowd that I'm confident they have great stuff to share. They have worked on some amazing things. And only because they feel a little bit insecure about this whole speaker thing, they just postpone it and never end up doing it. So that's why we came up with this idea of assigning coaches, basically. We have a lot of experienced speakers in our networks. We can assign you with an experienced speaker who can coach you and help you making the step from aspiring speaker to actual full-blown tech speaker. And maybe we can invite you on stage on our next edition. And from there, maybe you can take it to even bigger stages on conferences around the world. That would be a great achievement if we can support these kind of things. So if you're interested in a speaker bootcamp, as we call it, let us know. We will work with you and see how we can help you. Or if you don't need coaching but still would like to speak on one of our events, meetups, conference, submit a proposal. There's a form on our Meetup page. You can find it quite easily, I think. Otherwise, just talk to one of us. Right. I can feel the tension rising. Before I'm going to kick it off tonight, make sure you follow these accounts because that's where we send out all the updates, both for our own meetups as well as the conference. and also for our sister events, React Amsterdam, React Native Amsterdam, run by Robert and Dennis. Or if you would like to join the conversation, that's also possible. Just request an invite to our Slack channel, and well, it's a nice way of getting in touch, staying in touch with us. There's one more surprise. During the break, we have a lot of free swag, you call it, I think. T-shirts, both women and men. I think it's in the corner, right? Am I right, Robert? It's in the corner over there. So in the break, please make sure to check out the booth in the corner for some free swag and get the word out. Wear it, of course, because otherwise it's just a waste. Wear it and get the word out about these great meetups and conferences. But I think I've talked too much already. I'm pretty proud of tonight's schedule. I think it's pretty hot. That's why we put the flame over there. We have 3 great tech talks. That's kind of the foundation of every good meetup, right? But also we have, there's the return of our Fireside chat. Last edition, we had a great interview, Fireside chat with PPK, Peter Paul Koch. And we have decided to let this concept return for this edition. And we have invited Koen Bok, who is like, I think, a mastermind entrepreneur. He is one of the guys behind Framer. And I'm really interested to hear what's going to happen in this interview. More about that later. All right, I think it's time for me to introduce our first speaker. His name is Sam Bellen. He's going to tell you all about all the stuff that you may not know the browser could do. He needed an audio out, so maybe that hints a little bit for what to expect for his talk. Please come up the stage, Sam Bellen. Give him a round of warm applause to Sam Bellen while he connects his laptop. Let's hope it works without too many painful experiences. Do you need a mic or do you have one? I do not have a mic. Well, then you can lend mine. That's no problem. Ooh, I hear something.
Yeah, right now.
Great.
It's very loud.
I give the stage to Sam Bellen.
Almost set. Way too much cables in my laptop, but yeah. So, I didn't know the browser could do that. Here's a little story. Last week I was in Washington and I was talking to a guy who was studying computer science. And he asked me, what area should I explore the most? Because should I go native, should I do desktop software, or should I go and do some web stuff? And I was like, wait and see. Tomorrow I'll give a talk about the web, and maybe I can convince you. So I hope I convinced him. I'm not sure because I didn't see him anymore. But today I'm going to talk about some things you can do on the web that you may or not know were possible. First off, my name is Sam Bellen. I work as a software engineer at Made with Love, which is a company in Belgium. I am one of the co-organizers of Frontiers, which is kind of the other player in the meetup scene. We're friends, it's all cool. I'm part of the Belgium team, so I don't have anything to do with the Dutch team, so that's totally cool. You can find me online as Sam Bellen. That's Twitter, GitHub, whatever you want. I like cats. This is my cat. And my cat will be visible throughout this whole presentation because I like cats. So let's get started. The first thing I want to talk about is the speech API. Who of you knew that the browser could talk? Wow. Maybe I should just go to the bar and have a drink. But let's see if I have some audio. Yeah.
Hi, AmsterdamJS. Did you know the browser could talk? Cool, yeah. The web speech API converts text to spoken words. You can even choose my voice. Since I'm a female cat, I'll be talking with a female voice. Meow.
So, should I continue or should I just let my cat do all the talking? The cat? Too bad, you will have to do with me. I'm sorry. But yeah, the browser can talk. And it's not really that difficult to make the browser talk. Most modern browsers have started implementing the speech API. With modern browsers, I mean Firefox, Chrome, sometimes Edge. Safari is considered a browser, but not necessarily a modern browser. But let's see how we can make the browser talk. The first thing you need is a speech synthesizer, which you can find under your window object. I just put it under synth because synth is much shorter to type than window.speech synthesis. And we'll need this further in the examples. Once we have that synthesizer, we need to create a speech synthesis utterance, which is a very difficult word. And it just means that you create an object which contains the text you want your browser to talk or to say out loud, and then some characteristics of how to pronounce the words. So in this instance, I'm just creating a new utterance with the text, "Hi, everybody." And once we have that utterance, we just use your synth we saw earlier. You say .speak, and you give that utterance, and that's basically all you need to do.
Hi, everybody.
To make your browser talk. But as you've heard, this was
Hi, everybody.
a low male voice, while my cat is a female cat. So that's not exactly the result I was after. So the utterance does not only contain the text you want your browser to talk or to say, but it also contains some characteristics like the voice. I liked Fiona's voice. Is there Fiona in the room? No? Too bad. I liked Fiona's voice as a voice for my cat. Of course, my cat is very small, so I just increased the pitch a bit so it has a higher voice, and my cat is very lazy, so I just decreased the rate a bit so it talks a bit slower. I'm also from Belgian Limburg. I don't know if you know this, but we talk slower in Limburg. So when you just pass along these options...
Now, this is better, don't you think?
Sounds more like a cat to me. So let's recap. You need your synthesizer, you need a utterance, which is "Hi, everybody," and then you choose a voice, you use your utterance you created to set that voice, and then some other parameters like the pitch or the rate, and just let your synthesizer talk. That's it. The second thing is the speech recognition API. Who have you ever heard of the speech recognition API? Wow, you're really you know everything. That's cool. But yeah, your browser can recognize your speech or the stuff you say, so let's hope it works, because live demos. Hi, everybody. It does not work. We'll just reload just for fun. Hi, everybody. Yeah, nice. So in the green bubble, you see the stuff I just said. Hi, everybody. I could have said any other thing, but since I talk with a little bit of an accent and my English is not perfect, I try to keep it as simple as possible. But the browser, once I clicked the button, started listening to what I was saying, and then it started analyzing every word that I said, and in the end, it returned that I said, "Hi, everybody." It is important to know that you need internet access for this API to work. That's why I have my phone here. It's a hotspot, so I have some internet. Because the magic doesn't happen in the browser. It's really just Chrome, only Chrome, which sends the things you say to a server, does some magic stuff, and then sends a response back. So let's see how we can do this. The first thing you do is make a new speech recognition instance. Once you have that, you can set some parameters like, I want to start recognizing you as English. I don't want intermediate results. And then what to do when you get a result, or what to do when you get an error back. And that's basically it. So when you get a result back, you will get an object which contains the thing you said, or what the Google servers think you said. And also you get a percentage of how sure it is that it got it right, what you said, that it understood you perfectly. So the next one is a geolocation API. I think you all have seen these websites these days that ask you like, can I get your permission to know where you are? Especially news websites and other users' websites. It's done with the geolocation API. So let's see if it can find out where I am. Amsterdam. That's right, I think. So the browser just figured out that I am in Amsterdam. And we're more or less in that building called Crea. So that's quite accurate, actually. So the browser just figured out that I'm more or less in the vicinity of that point, which is a bit spooky. It's good to know that you will have to give your permission to a website for them to be able to get your location. Not just any website can go and ask your location. But once you've given the permission, you can do stuff like this. And you can do this with geolocation.getCurrentPosition, and that returns some coordinates. Now, I don't know about you, but coordinates, I don't really know what they mean because it's a longitude and latitude, and it's just a bunch of numbers. So I use a Google Maps API. You can use any other API, but the Google Maps API is easy to convert those coordinates to a place that's readable by me, like the locality, which is Amsterdam. And looks like my cat figured out how to send notifications, because you can do that in a browser these days. And you can do that using the notifications API. Showing notifications is pretty easy, and you can do it like this. First off, again, you have to ask for permission, so you cannot just start sending notifications to everybody. But once you've given that notification, all you need to do is create a new notification and send along some text, like a title or a body or a cat picture as an icon, because cat pictures, you always need cat pictures. And you get something like this. And this is a native notification OS X, but if you're using Windows or Linux, it will be the native notification of your operating system. So it's nice to know that you can really use some native features of your operating system from the browser. You can also add click events to this notification, so when I would have clicked on that notification, I could have opened a website or gone to a certain page or done a certain action, and this is by just adding a click event handler to that notification we created earlier. The next one are push notifications, or push notifications, just to say it in team. Does anybody know the difference between a regular notification and a push notification? You're not going to answer anyway, but I will explain for you. It's nice to know that there's some people who already know it. If I click this button, we see notification, and it kind of looks the same as the previous ones, but it's important to know that this notification was not sent from the front end of my website, my JavaScript, but came from a push server and was pushed to the front end. We were just listening for a push event, and then once we got that event, we showed the notification. It has some benefits, like if I would just close this window, we would not be browsing my website, but something would have happened, and my server would decide, or not, oh, there it is, that I wanted to show a notification. You can still show notifications from the website, even though I'm not really visiting that website anymore, which is kind of black magic. So that's one of the main advantages of push notifications and how they're implemented in the browser. So let's see if we can get this running again. All right. To start listening for a push notification event, you first need to register a service worker, and a service worker is basically just an external worker which can intercept network requests, or you can cache stuff with it, or you can just start listening for push events. So you just check if it's available in your browser, or once it is available, you just register this service worker.js file, and once that's registered, you have access to the push manager. So you can create a subscription, send that subscription to your server so that your server knows that this ID which you just created is your user, so you will only get the right messages for your user. And once you've done this, you can start listening for a push event. This is a lot. I'm just going to skip through it because it's a lot of code, but it's just a basic idea of how it works. Once you get a push event, you can just do self-registration.show notification, and show a title or a body. You can also, I've hard-coded this title and body in this example, but you can just get them from the push message that was sent from the server instead of hard-coding them, so you can get some dynamic push messages. But that's about everything you need to do to show push messages, even if the user is not on your website, as long as the browser is not completely shut down. The next one is the Battery Manager API, which is a bit creepy because why would a browser need access to the data of your battery? It's a funny story, but as you can see, my battery is charging and I have 86% of battery, which is correct. Now, if I would unplug my power cord, it doesn't do anything because of live demos. So let's just refresh this page and try again. Nah. Okay, yeah, it advanced while I was not clicking my stuff. So the thing I wanted to demonstrate with this is you can listen to changes in the state of your battery or changes in the state of if you're charging or not. And that's done by the Push Manager API, the Battery Manager API, sorry. The first thing you need to do is navigate to .getBattery, and then it will return a battery object which contains a few things, like is your device charging or not, or what is the level of your battery? In my instance, it was 86%, I think. How long will it take to charge, and how long will it take the battery to be completely discharged? But you can also start listening for changes in this data, like you can add some event listeners. And then when the level changes or when the charging changes, you can advance to the next slide if your demos would work, which they didn't. So yeah. The next one is the Media Recorder API. Has anybody ever played with this before? Few hands. I'm happy there's not too many hands, because I really like this one. And what it does is it records some media like you would expect. So let's record some media. Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. So I just created a movie right in my browser without some special backend services or anything. I just started recording the camera feed and my microphone feed and came up with this movie that we can replay if we want to, because it's super interesting. Hi, everybody. Once again, so I can drink. Hi, everybody. So yeah, I just recorded a video in my browser using the Media Recorder API. And to do this, you need to combine a few APIs, actually. The first thing you need to do is get access to your microphone and to your webcam, so we use getUserMedia for this. Navigator.mediadevices.getUserMedia. This used to be just under Navigator, but they moved it to be under Media Devices, and it now returns a promise instead of just a callback. And you say, I want video or I want audio, and when you get that, you get a stream. And with this stream, we can set the source object of a HTML5 video element to that stream, which will allow us to preview the video we're recording. That's what allowed me to see what we are actually recording. But we can also use a media recorder, like this is supposed to go. So we create a new media recorder, pass along that stream, and once we've done this, we can start actually recording the video of our webcam or the audio of our webcam. You can set some event handlers, like what to do when there's data available, or what to do when you stop recording, and then, of course, you start recording. This on data available handler will just fire every few milliseconds, and it will give you some data of what has been recorded. We're just going to push it into an array later, like so. And then when we stop recording, we take that array and then we convert that to a blob, and then we take that blob and we convert that to some base64 encoded string, so we can pass along that string to a HTML5 video element. It's a bit of a detour, but it works. So yeah, that's how you can record video and or audio in the browser. The next one is my favorite API of everything. If you've seen my talk at the conference earlier this year, I talked about this all talk. I will try to keep it short. But you can create audio. like so. This was not feedback. Uh, it might have sounded like feedback, but you can create audio in the browser. This is not an MP3 file or a WAV file. This is really audio created by the browser. It's already a bit nicer. You can do stuff like this. And this is all just created in the browser by some JavaScript code, which I think is amazing. It's really an API that I can play around with for hours and hours and never get bored of it. But let's see how you can create some tones, or very, very basically. The first thing you need is a new audio context, which is the basis of the audio API, the web audio API. Once you've got that, you will create an oscillator. An oscillator is just going to create a tone, a fixed tone, like the first tone you heard, the thing that sounded like feedback but wasn't feedback. Once you've got an oscillator, you can also configure some values like the frequency or which type of oscillator it should be. Should it be a sine wave or a sawtooth wave or a square wave or stuff like this? And you can start it. Now, when you start this oscillator, you will not hear anything until you've connected your oscillator to your destination, which is basically just saying, I want to hear the output of this oscillator through my speakers. It's important to know that the audio context has a separate clock, because when you're scheduling notes or you're making a song, you want it to be very, very precise. And if you would have used set interval or set timeout, if there's stuff happening in your JavaScript code, like some asynchronous codes happening or stuff, it will delay your set interval. You don't want that when you're creating a song, so you can use the separate clock, which you can find under current time, like so. Yeah, so you can just use this time to start and stop an oscillator, for example. So you create an oscillator with a certain tone, you start at a certain time, stop at a certain time, then create another oscillator, increase the frequency, start it again, stop it again, and that's how you can compose songs, by just starting and stopping a lot of oscillators or other stuff. So if you put it all together, you create a new audio context, create an oscillator, set some frequency and stuff like this, and start it, and you just connect it to your destination, which are your speakers, and you can create music in your browser, which is cool. The next one is the vibration API. You can make your phone vibrate using JavaScript, which is a bit weird, but it's possible. And it's very easy, but my laptop cannot vibrate, of course, so I cannot really show it, but if you would go to this URL later, you can try it out for yourself if you're using Android and you're using Chrome. Excuse me? I will share it later with everybody, if that's okay, or you want to try it now. Are you on Android and Chrome? Okay, let's hope this live demo, which is not on my device, works. It's meow.sambega.be/vibration example.
Maybe someone can do a drum roll, just to raise the tension a bit.
I'm curious as well if it's going to work. No drum roll? You know the URL? Can I continue, or do you want to see it again? So let us know if it works. Okay, then it just... Okay. And does it vibrate? Anyway, it should be very easy to make your phone vibrate. If your phone supports the vibration API, and it should be done like so. You navigate to .vibrate, and you just pass along a time of how long you want it to vibrate, like 400 milliseconds. You can even let it vibrate in a pattern, like 400 milliseconds of vibrating, 200 of nothing, 400 of vibrating. And this works really well if you are on the correct phone, using the correct operating system, using the correct browser, and your internet works very well, and who knows what else needs to be correct, but it works. I've tried it. True story. So the next one is device orientation. And this means that you can start listening to the orientation of your device, or you can move your device and get different parameters back. So let's try this out. I have this mouse, and my laptop is currently tilted, so you see that the mouse is moving down. Now, if I would move my laptop a bit like this, you can see the mouse going towards the cat, but we're not cruel here, so, oh. We're not going to give the cat the mouse, or do we? Anyway, you can start listening for the orientation of your device and do some stuff like this, like create a fun game so you could feed your cat mouses if you really wanted to. And you can do this by just listening to a device orientation event, which is just you add an event listener to your window, listen for a device orientation event, and once this event fires, which is a lot if you have the right hardware in your computer or phone, you will get back some data like alpha, beta, and gamma, which I have absolutely no idea what they mean. But if you play along with it, you will see that they will change based on how you hold your device. It's also important to know that not every laptop contains an accelerometer or a gyroscope. For example, I also have a 15-inch version of this laptop, and it doesn't have it, and this one does. Who knows why? It's Apple's decision, or whichever computer manufacturer you have. But if they have the right hardware, you can start listening to changes in your device orientation and create fun games with it, for example. So what else is there in the browser? We have the Payments API, which lets you just seamlessly integrate with some native, let's call it, payment flow, so you can create payments and do payments in a safe way. You have the Web Bluetooth API, which lets you just talk or communicate with Bluetooth devices. You have the Web USB API, which lets you communicate with USB devices. What I'm trying to say is there's these many APIs coming constantly into a browser, so you really cannot predict what's coming to the browser and what I would be able to tell next year when I would be at AmsterdamJS, for example. So it's constantly changing, and there's ever more APIs being added to the browser, which makes web development one of the most interesting fields of computer science, in my opinion. But of course, we have to throw it all together. Puss is the name of my cat. I'm very original with cats, with names. But you all know that Apple has Siri, and Google has some assistant, and then you have Amazon, which has Alexa, I think. So I have Puss, and it can do some stuff. I think the audio is turned off. Oh no, my audio is broken. Doesn't matter, it would talk now because we saw that the browser could talk. But we can ask her stuff like, let's do something fun. I'm never coming back to Holland. Oh, and that it. So you can listen to the stuff I say, but my cat doesn't know what to do, so let's try this again. Yeah, let's do something fun. Aha. And you can draw ears on your head, for example. Because Snapchat has it and Instagram has it, so you can do stuff like this, or say, remind me, what am I typing? 1 minute. Yeah, my computer is very slow. It's a 1 minute, which is very important, so we put an exclamation mark behind it. But it will hopefully remind me in 1 minute. You can do stuff like, what's the weather? Good enough, because it knows the word weather. So now it's going to try to get my location, and based on my location, it's going to try to fetch me some weather, which is a temperature of 7.35 degrees. Does anybody has a thermometer? No? I think I will believe my cat. So if you combine these APIs, you can really do some cool experiments on the web. What else can I do? Because you have to wait until the minute has passed, of course. You can ask, what's my battery status, for example? What's my battery status? It's fully charged. You're lying. check, check. So we see that something has happened. It reminded us of something very, very interesting. But yeah, you can just combine these APIs to do some cool experiments in the browser. That's it. You can find this presentation under meow.samega.be. And I hope you liked it or you learned a thing or two. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you so much
You're welcome.
for this nice overview of what else we can do if you have Android and Chrome and the right hardware. All right. While Sam is being unplugged, because the cat was kind of complicated, but this setup of ours is kind of complicated as well. That gives me some time to introduce our next speaker. She's over there. Give a warm round of applause for Rebecca Hill. Okay, I'm going to ask a very sensitive question, but I would like to have an honest answer from all of you. Who of you, when he has built something and it doesn't work as intended, the first thing he does is add console logs in his code? Yeah, even Koen over there in the back raises his hand, so I guess it's still so common. Rebecca has some ideas for how to improve that, so give it up for Rebecca.
Okay, how's that? Oh god, that's fun. Can you guys hear me all right? It's a little quiet still, isn't it? Okay, how's that? Good? And with any luck, we will have some slides in a second. Anyone got a good joke?
First entrepreneur that fixes this problem is going to be rich.
Yep. Ooh, yes. Okay. So, hi everyone. My name's Rebecca, and I'm a front-end developer currently working with Node and React and Redux and all their friends. And I have a few thoughts about debugging that I want to share with you guys. There should be something useful in here no matter how deep down this rabbit hole you've been before, but I really want to hear your thoughts also, so please feel free to tweet at me. I'm at Rebecca on Twitter. So I'm just going to do a quick plug because we are looking for people at the moment and we have a really awesome team. I don't know if you can tell, but that's actually me in the top right, and there's a couple of other people in the audience who are also in this photo. We have an awesome team and working on some really cool projects, so if you're looking for work, hit us up. Okay, so the polls are in, and I'm pleased to see that you guys reflect this. As you can see, it's pretty safe to assume that the majority of front-end developers are using console log the majority of the time to debug their code. And it's understandable because we've been conditioned to use simple text editors like Notepad, Atom, Sublime Text. And a large portion of web developers have just never really had that exposure or experience to a formal or traditional debugging process. And the browser console is a pretty nice way of inspecting our logs, right? It's simple and it's easy, so why would we change it? Well, because there is so much more. So just sticking to the console for now, I don't know if you knew, but there are a heap more methods on that console object that some of us don't even know about. Console.table is one of my favorites. It's really nice for debugging arrays to be able to see and compare all the different objects in your array. And console.dir is one of my favorites as well because it's really great when you want to log out the actual JavaScript representation of your DOM node rather than the HTML markup. It's even better in Node. So console.log obviously spits out our objects in black and white, not super readable. And also it only goes 2 levels deep. So you can see here the geo object. We don't really get any information about what's actually inside that. Whereas console.dir, we can pass through a couple of configuration options, and we get a lot more readable output. And there's also some really handy features of the console coming up. So this is in Canary at the moment, which is the nightly build of Chrome, which is really useful if you want to check out what the latest features are. But do keep in mind it can be a bit unstable and a bit slow sometimes. But yeah, so for instance, here we have on the left a new way of categorizing our logs, which is really handy. And also you can group similar logs together. So it's really great when you've got a lot of noise in the console and it's hard to find what you're actually looking for. Okay, so let's say we've been working with console functions for a while now, and we want to step it up. So what's next? Well, the DevTools have some other really handy features, namely the DevTools debugger. So the simplest way to activate this is by adding the debugger keyword to your code, as you can kind of see that I've done here where it's highlighted. And yeah, when the browser hits that keyword, it will pause the execution of your code and allow you to inspect it. So for example, here I can hover over the mysteries object and I can log out my local variables in the console, which I wouldn't normally be able to do. I can inspect the entire scope of the code at that point. And I can also step through my code line by line to further inspect it. So one tool that's almost essential when using the debugger is blackboxing. So this lets us prevent the debugger from stepping into certain scripts when we are debugging code. So here I was debugging a React lifecycle function, like a component to mount or something, and I stepped through into the React DOM library. Well, I can be pretty confident that my bug's not in here, so I blackboxed the script. This way, the next time that I step through a function that hits that file, the debugger will simply ignore it, and I can focus on my application code. You can also include patterns in the DevTools settings here, so I can blackbox entire folders, like node modules, for instance. So the DevTools debugger has a crazy amount of features. I can't cover them all. But yeah, so you can add breakpoints just on certain event listeners, like on the left here. So anytime I click on my browser, a breakpoint will be hit, and I can inspect the code at that point. And you can also do it when a DOM node is modified, like at the top here. So this info box div, if I add this break on attribute modifications, it will break whenever a class is changed or an attribute is changed, added or removed. And you can even add conditional breakpoints. So this means that your code is only paused when a certain condition is met. This is really useful for when a certain function, say a React render, is called multiple times. But the first time it's called, my mysteries data here isn't going to have anything in it because the API hasn't returned yet. And so I don't really care about that point in the code. So that's why I've put a conditional breakpoint in here to only break when there's actually data there so I can inspect it. So sometimes we might be in a situation where we have little to no control over the code that we're debugging. It might be some JavaScript on an environment that we can't reproduce locally, or the process of deploying our changes to our remote environment might be really frustrating and slow and painful. Debugging a critical production issue is stress city, and so working with a tricky infrastructure makes that even worse. So say you have a version of your application running locally, using a Chrome extension called Resource Override, like I've got here. I can proxy the call that my production website is making. So in this case, from bundle.js on the left-hand side to instead load my local version of bundle.js, which I've got on localhost somewhere. What this means is that we can change our code and test it within the larger environment where the bug actually occurred, rather than the kind of false environment that sometimes we have locally. Applications like Fiddler and my favorite Charles Proxy also allow you to do this, but with a lot more features, including the ability to monitor and inspect all the calls that your site makes. I've been on teams that have literally used Charles Proxy for their entire front-end development flow, because many big applications are tricky to set up locally. And trying to keep the back-end architecture and the APIs and your front-end up to date across all different teams is, it can be really painful. So if you have a reliable staging environment, then proxying your front-end files is a nice way to skip that setup entirely. So a slightly different approach is available in Canary. Make sure you first enable override network requests in the DevTools settings. And then you can click on the Sources tab, go to Overrides, set up overrides, and select a folder on your hard drive. And then give Chrome access to it. And then make your changes in the DevTools. So here I'm going to make the Reddit background purple. And I'm going to save, and you can see I've got this purple dot now indicating that it's being overridden. And then when I refresh, the changes are persisted. This can be super useful. So yeah, the previous solution using proxies is great if you have a local version of your code that you can map to, but this is perfect for when you don't have that set up and you just want to change something simple to test it. So a lot of the technology that I'm covering either is seriously enhanced by or doesn't work at all really without source maps. So quick refresh. A source map is a file that allows the browser or other technology to map the compiled or compressed code back to its original file. So yeah, it's another really important tool that helps us with debugging. Minified code is pretty impossible to debug properly. So on the top, we're inspecting a website without source maps. You can see that all the variables have been mangled and the ES6 class has been transpiled. Whereas on the bottom, source maps have been set up. You can kind of see it here, source map from main. And yeah, it actually looks like the code that we wrote. Depending on your build process, they're pretty easy to set up. And most importantly, they only get downloaded when you open the DevTools, so they won't affect your application or its performance. Okay, so that's the browser. What about Node? Well, you can actually debug Node in the Chrome DevTools. You just need to run your Node script with this flag, and BRK, by the way, means to break before your code starts so that you can put your breakpoints in straight away. And then you can either click on this green Node icon in any of your DevTools windows or on the open dedicated DevTools for Node link. Yeah, and if you like this workflow, then you should check out the Node Inspection Manager extension, which manages all your scripts in your windows for you. But let's get to the really good stuff. So integrating debugging in the editor has been around in various forms for ages, but many JavaScript developers are either not aware of it, they think that it's too tricky to set up, or they don't want to change their debugging mindset because they don't think it's worth it. Well, I'll let you be the judge, just make sure you give it a go first. So fortunately, we have a lot more front-end focused editor options now, some of which included inbuilt debugger. So I'm going to focus on VS Code because I love it. It's really light and it's easy to use and it's fast and it's what I use every day. And I promise I'm not trying to sell you anything because, I mean, that would be dumb because it's free. But yeah, there are other IDEs like WebStorm that also include an inbuilt debugger. And the idea is pretty similar. So I'm going to take you through my debugging process and how I set it up using a mini front-end React app that talks to an Express server. I've added a couple of spelling mistakes just to simulate the idea of what it might actually be like to debug a error. So a typical process for debugging a front-end application might look something like this. We open the browser, we have an error in the console. Okay, we go to the editor, console log out some of the variables that we think might be causing that error. Back to the browser, refresh, or maybe a hot module reload. And if we're lucky, we've chosen a variable that helps us determine how to fix the bug, if we're lucky. Back to the editor, make the fix. Back to the browser, refresh. Okay, great, finally fixed. It's a hell of a lot of guesswork, and it's a lot of switching back and forth. So let's see how we can improve that flow. So VS Code has a bunch of extensions that let you debug tons of different languages in different frameworks. The most useful for us is the Debugger for Chrome extension. It's actually framework agnostic, so you could be using Vue or Angular or jQuery or whatever you like. But I'm going to show you the configuration for my React app. So first of all, we go to extensions. We look for the Chrome extension. We install it. And then we reload VS Code. Super quick. Okay, cool. Let's go to the debugger and add a configuration. We just now need to look for the Chrome launch configuration. And the only thing we need to change here is the URL. And I'm changing it to localhost 3000 because that's what create React app uses by default. Save that and press play, and with any luck, ta-da, we have our app. And this is loaded with the debugger ready to debug. There's absolutely no other setup or settings anywhere. And the debugging experience is also really nice. So here we have a bug. We've got the quotes are missing, they're not showing up. So I'm going to go into my editor and add a breakpoint. And then refresh. And I can see that some of the properties are coming through, but yeah, quote is undefined. Okay, that's weird. I can have a look in the code here and go up a couple of levels and check out my state. So this is my React state, and there is, quote, it's spelled with an E. Okay, great. Go back into my code, fix the bug, remove the breakpoint, refresh. Magic, fixed. And I literally didn't even touch the browser. So yeah, similar situation occurs with Node. So a typical workflow if we're dealing with, say, a Node API might be something like this. We start with an error in the terminal. We switch to the editor, write a console log to check a variable. We switch to Postman or another terminal to run curl, or a browser to run our app, however we want to hit our API. Switch back to the terminal to see the results. If we're lucky, we can write a fix for it. Hit the API again and hope our bug is fixed. So again, we can really clean up this workflow by doing so much more in the editor. Here's how to set it up. So I have a bug on the right-hand side, server area. My mysteries route is not returning anything. And so I'm going to add another configuration. And this time I'm going to use the Node launch program configuration. I don't have to change anything because my entry point is app.js. And then I press play, and my API is now running. I'm just going to quickly test that by pinging it, and hey, it returns Pong. Okay, great. So once we have that debugger running, we can hit this broken mysteries endpoint with our React application and easily debug what's going on in our Node API. So I'm going to add a breakpoint to my mysteries route, refresh to hit it, and you can see everything looks legit. Okay, we're getting the request through correctly. So I'm going to step through my code. Everything looks fine. Okay, we've hit an error. Misters is not defined. Okay, apparently I'm a terrible speller. So I'm going to go through and fix my bug, remove the breakpoint, refresh, and then hit the API again by refreshing my app. And it's fixed. Magic. So the even cooler thing is that VS Code will let you make compound configurations, meaning that you can debug your front and your back end code at the same time over multiple and different languages and frameworks. So yeah, one more thing before I finish. I should just quickly mention that in no way have I covered this space. I've obviously had to focus on one browser and one IDE, and I didn't even touch on mobile, performance, HTTP debugging, just to name a few. There's so much more to explore. And of course, accurate and realistic test coverage is an extremely important and useful way to prevent bugs in the first place. Also provide a quick and easy way to test fixes and prevent bugs from occurring again. So the golden rule is once you fixed a bug, make sure there's a test for it. So the last thing I'm going to leave you with is this. If for some reason you're going to stick with console log, that's fine. Just make sure you write a good snippet for it. And that's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you so much, Rebecca. I must admit, it must have been the coolest, most magical live coding demo I've ever seen. Without keyboard input, without mouse movement, just magical, no problems. Wow, need to remember that one. Our next speaker is already up on stage right next to me. His name is Maurits Rijk. He's going to talk about testing, and he's going to introduce some ideas that he ported from Clojure, because as far as I understood, this man is a fan of Clojure. Let's see what he has got to learn us as JavaScript developers. Please give a warm applause to Maurits Rijk.
if only this would work, that would be nice.
Yeah. We also hope it's going to
I
work.
think the resolution is a bit...
It was working, right?
Yeah, it was. Ah. Okay, that's better. What happened?
Wait a minute. Wait.
Ah, sorry.
Right.
Who of you has ever used the closure? Can I see hands? Oh, that's
Oh, okay, that's
not
quite
many.
nice.
That's not many. So closure spec, no idea. One hand.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah, that's part of my
Then-
secret agenda for being here today. This is a talk about Node.js and JavaScript, but of course I want to sneak in some closure, so we try to convert people to the right language.
well, let's hope that this technology is going to work in the end, because otherwise, yeah, there's so much room for education here, and then would be even more of a pity.
Okay. Okay, well, this is being fixed on a personal level, apart from my name. I don't have any cats. I don't intend to have any cats. I won't show pictures of cats and stuff like that. And the closest I become to having a cat is I recently started playing violin half a year ago. So there are some, hopefully no
You-
cat lovers are in
You
circles
mean
right now.
the sound they make is similar? Is that what you mean?
Well, mostly, mostly my sound is similar. Ah, we're almost there, I think.
Looks like something's going to.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Needs mirroring.
No, just one screen.
It's fine.
Oh yeah, the mirroring is fine, sorry. And we all set, I guess. Okay, yeah. Come on. Why is it not working? Okay. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so this talk is about Speculaas, and I guess you all know what Speculaas is. It's a bit like this, and for our Belgium guests, I think it's called Speculaas in Belgium, so whenever I go to give this talk in Belgium, I will rename this application. It's about specification-based testing and development. And here's a nice description. Specification-based testing is a standard, expressive, powerful, integrated system for specification and testing. So Speculaas is all of this. And I didn't think of this myself, of course. I took this from a closure spec, all this, this description, and also the actual idea of writing Speculaas. Also, initially it was called spec.js, but that name was already taken, so that's why I came up with Speculaas, because it has a name, the word spec in it. So why did I develop something like this, or why did I steal this idea? I love JavaScript a lot, especially since I'm recently doing a lot of Java again, so that makes me appreciate the dynamic language that JavaScript is. But it also has a downside, because if it's dynamically typed, you will have to write more tests or debug a bit more or make sure that your program is going to run. And writing tests is not that much fun, in my opinion. Takes lots of time, and it's repetitive work and it's a bit boring. And also, even if you write wonderful tests, you will still have the situation that you will get some runtime errors, because you will always forget some edge cases. So what I did is I created Speculaas, and Speculaas is based around the idea of predicates and specifications. And this is a bit of boring, well, hopefully not too boring theory, but predicates are just statements about a variable, about a function, about a data structure, etc., etc. And predicates can be one of those in Speculaas and a closure spec. Notice that I used the word closure again. So a predicate can be a very simple Boolean operator or Boolean function. It can also be a more complicated predicate expression. It can be a combined expression, so you can combine different expressions, predicates, using and or. So you can compose a whole hierarchy of specifications. I use the word predicate and specification bits loosely coupled. Predicates is basically the overall arching principle, and specifications are the actual specifications that can have a name in Speculaas. Arrays, maps, and sets, even though these are data structures, can also be used as predicates. And I will give some examples of that next. This is the first example. The actual predicate is integer here. As you can guess, it will see if the parameter is an integer. And the s dot is valid. The s is the namespace of Speculaas. Is valid is just a function that checks if this predicate is valid. And if you say is valid integer 3, it will probably say yes, that is true. You can also use an anonymous function for this. In this case, we use a function that sees if the variable is odd or even. In this case, odd. So if is valid anonymous function .2, it will apply your parameter to this function. The third example is something like an array. So I use an array as a predicate, and in this case it will check if the actual value is within this array. And it will return true in this case, because 2 is part of this array 1, 2, 3. Well, this is pretty trivial. It becomes a bit more interesting if you combine predicates. And for example, s.tuple creates a predicate which consists of 3 integers. So it creates a data point in this case. That's why I defined this as a point, which should consist of 3 integers. So whenever I try to put 2 integers in it, or an integer and any other data type, it will complain about this. So in this case, s is valid point 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3 is a valid data point. So it will return true. More examples. Bear with me, there will be some code later, and I will give some demo, but this is just a bit of an introduction. You can compose predicates. In this case, I use the OR operator, so the spec.or operator. And basically it says here a name or an ID, that's the name I give to this specification, should be either a string or an integer. And in this case, if I say is valid name or ID 1, it will actually say yes, that's valid because this is an integer. And even the word 1, the string 1, is also valid because in this case it's a string. If I would try to put in a floating point number in here, it would complain and say, well, sorry, this is not a valid predicate. Finally, another combination. You can see here that I can define a predicate which is called, or specification which is called odd, so it determines if a variable is odd. And it is odd if it is an integer, and it is odd. It's a bit of a weird combination in this case, but it serves to show how the AND operator can be composed with 2 different predicates, so I can build larger structures. And the next step says, well, I have a collection of odd numbers. It should have at least 1 number, so that's the plus operator. This is your standard regular expression operator, so plus means 1 or more. And it should have 1 or more odd numbers. So here I reuse the odd specification that I defined previously. In this case, I can say, well, is this valid? I have a list with 2 numbers, 1 and 3. Now, in this case, it's valid because both of these numbers are odd, and it has at least 1 element. And in the last case, 1, 3, 6, it would say, well, sorry, this is not odd because this is not a collection of odd numbers because it has 6 in it. So, a couple of examples of specifications. Now, how can you use these specifications? There are a large number of operators, but I show the first 3 ones here. The is valid we have already seen. What it does is it checks your specification against input. So if 3 is an integer in this case, that's a valid specification and says true. If you want to have some more information, just true and false is not that much information. You can say, well, does this conform the value 3 or the string 3? Does this conform to the specification is integer? And in this case, it will say, no, sorry, it doesn't, and it will dump a string or return a string which has no spec invalid. Even that is quite limited. The third variant is easier to use or gives more information, because you can say, okay, I've seen that this specification is not correct, or that this input is not correct. So I use the explain function. And when I use explain, it will nicely show what part of the specification or what part of my input didn't fulfill my specification. And in this case, it says, well, the value 3 fails the predicate is int. Now, this is pretty straightforward, but you could combine a whole data structure and it would nicely pinpoint what part of your data structure doesn't fulfill your specification in this case. So this works completely recursive. You can build it up. Well, this is a little bit of theory, so you have some background on what you will see next in the demo. It's kind of a live demo, which means I will do some coding. Most of that is prepared, so it should work in theory, but I will also change some code, and in general that will fail most of the time. So what you see here on the top is a bit of code. It's just the standard Node.js code or JavaScript code. Initially, I will set it here. Before the previous talk by Rebecca, I didn't know that console log could do a bit more than just dump 1 or 2 levels. It's nice to see that there's more possible, but in this case, I just defined a function inspect that nicely formats my variables, and I will execute it here. Now, I defined the function inspect. These are just a couple of helper functions. This part is int, is string. Those are the first predicates I'm going to use, and they are important from utils library, so even that is not that exciting. But now I defined 2 predicates, and now I can start to use them. So in this case, let's see if 2 is a valid integer. And as you can see, yes, it's a valid integer. Well, that's not too remarkable, I guess. And when I try to see if the number 2 or the string 2 is also a valid integer, it says, no, sorry, it's not a valid integer. When I would like to see why, I can do the explain function. In this case, it says, well, value 2 fails the predicate is int. This is just one single level of specification and validation. Now, this was just a very short introduction. Next, we are going to build up a complete data structure, a way more complex data structure, which contains a game of cards. And the game of cards has several things. Of course, it has cards, it has players, it has a deck, etc., etc. So in this demo, I will show you how I built up this data structure. And the first thing I do is I create a suit of cards. So that should be clubs, diamonds, hearts, and spades. Well, that makes sense, I guess. I also define a rank. A rank should be anything. Should be everything from 1 to 11, and Jack, Queen, King, and Ace. And I also need a deck of cards, and a deck of cards are all the possible combinations with suits and ranks. And again, I'm going to use the word closure, because the original closure code's way more compact in this case, but this is the Node.js equivalent, and it also, of course, works. I could do now inspect deck. And this is okay. This is the first time I type some code and it immediately fails. Yeah. So it generates a deck of cards. Again, this is still some initial definitions. The next part is where I define an actual card, and a card contains is a tuple of a rank and a suit. So this is a definition of one playing card. I defined it right now, and I can also define a hand of cards. And as you can see, a hand of cards says is star card, so it's 0 or more cards. So you can have an empty hand with no cards in this case. And now let's show something that you can actually do with these definitions, with these specifications. Since I have a specification of a card, I can say, let's generate a couple of those cards. 12 in this case. So this is first example of how you can generate data that can later be used in your actual testing, for example. So now we have defined a couple of cards. But we are going to continue building up this whole game of cards. So the next step is we create a player. Let's see what that is. So now we have a player. A player has a name, of course. It will have a score. And a player consists of a name, a score, and a hand. So there's a hand of cards. So we are continuing building this data structure. Okay. And one more step, players. We have more than one player, of course, in a card game. It can be even 0 players, then it's not a very interesting game, but players is a collection of player. So again, we build upon current data structure. We built a deck. And finally, we built a game. And what you can see here is a game consists of both players and a deck. So I have fully specified what a game should look like, how the player should look, how a deck should look, etc., etc. Now this is a specification, and we can start seeing if this is a valid specification or if the data is valid. So let's define Kenny. Kenny is a player. I don't know much about playing card games, but I think Kenny Roche is probably famous. But let's see, we defined a Kenny which has a score of 100.3, and that is invalid because we specified that the score should be an integer. So let's see if this works. Well, you see, Kenny is not a valid player, probably because of its score, and we can explain why this is not the valid input. And again, you will say predicate fails spec. I didn't use this nice console dump with different levels, so you still see this object. But you can see the player fails the predicate is int. So we can fix that again. We make this a nice integer. We evaluate it again. And hopefully now Kenny is a valid player. And indeed, now it says true. And if I do an explain now, there's not much to explain because he's valid and it says success. So that's about it. Okay. Now we have a complete game, which you can also validate. So I defined the game, and it consists of a deck. It consists of a player, and this player is holding in his hands 2 bananas. And again, it should say, well, sorry, but this is not valid. I hope. Yeah, like you can see here, it says false because he's holding bananas, and bananas is not valid in playing cards, obviously. Okay, now that we have defined all the data structures, we can start generating players and start generating games. Let's first try this with the specification of a player, and based on that, generate one single player. And you can see generator creates a player with an empty name, a 0 score, and a handful of cards. Now, the reason that this name is empty and the score is 0 is that the test generator, the properties generator, initially always starts with a empty string and with a 0 score. So this is a nice test input because you can see if it's allowed to have players with no name, for example. So this is a very nice test case. And because we also already defined the game, which is a deck of cards and a collection of players, we can also generate a complete game instead of just a player. I assigned this to a variable game, and if I inspect this, well, this is not a very, well, it is a game. This game, initial game, has 0 players. It's an empty array, and there's a deck of cards, so there are some cards laying on the table, 3 cards, and but it is a valid game, because you can have games without players, obviously. I can try to generate a game again, and hopefully this time it's a bit more interesting. Yeah, well, this is a more complete game. This game has a couple of players. They are all, well, they don't have a name, anonymous players, but could be kind of poker, so you try to be anonymous, I guess. And it has all these players are holding cards, Queen of Diamonds, 8 of Hearts, 5 of Clubs. We have 5 players, and we have an empty deck, so there are no cards on the table left. So this, again, is test input that can be used for any test. Right now, this generates just one game, but I can easily as well generate hundreds or thousands or millions of games, because you can generate as much data as you want. So this is about generating inputs. How am I doing on time, by the way? Because running out. Okay. Well, that's a good thing, because that was the part of the demo. This is for generating test data, and that's quite a nice thing, because then you can write your unit test and generate your unit test, and that saves a lot of time. However, most of the time, still some problems will escape. And for that, you can also specify functions, like it's done here. What you can see, if I have a very trivial function, it's called ranged random, and it will generate random numbers between start and end. When I want to test this function, if it actually does what it's supposed to do, I can create a specification, and that's why it's called fdef, function definition. And I say, okay, this function range random, what do I expect from this function? The first step is I specify the arguments. I shouldn't do this, I guess. I specify the arguments part, and in this case, the arguments part, waving doesn't help, I guess, so I point to mouse. My arguments are a concatenation of start and end. So the start and end here should be both integers. So I specify here that this should be an int, and the end should also be an int. I also specify that my args I can use, the start should be less than the end. So that's the input I specify. The return value, well, I want to know that is an integer, because I expect a ranged random number, so it should be an integer. So that's part of the return spec. And I can also define a function, fn here, that states a predicate about my function. So it relates my return value to the input arguments. And what I say here is, well, my return value, or my return value should be a value that should be larger than the start, or larger equal than the start, and smaller than the end function. So this is a complete specification of the ranged start function. Now I can use this function either to test my implementation, if it's correct. So I can use it in a unit test, and I created something here. I shouldn't do this. But it says stest check range random. So it will check my function implementation against my specification, completely independent. Even more important, I can use this specification to also do runtime instrumentation. So if I have created the specification, I can say instrument this function, and on my running application, it will continuously check how my function is called. So even in a runtime environment, I can dump information and pinpoint exactly where something went wrong. So that's the second powerful part of the specification. Okay, now for references, last time I used the word closure. If you really want to see the rationale behind it, why this is created, Rich Hickey, the inventor of closure, can explain this way better than I can. But he put a very nice rationale and overview on the closure.spec homepage. And if you want to try it for JavaScript or Node.js, because it's AmsterdamJS by all means, then you can have a look at the website, Speculaas website, and you can download and hopefully use this implementation. And so you will never have to, sorry, backwards, you will never have to debug again, and you can just write specifications and be done. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Maurits. Thank you very much for this nice insight. Well, as you may have noticed, our schedule tonight is extremely packed, which is why, unfortunately, there's no time for questions in between the talks, as you may have noticed. The good news is it's almost break time, so during the break, I'm sure you can run up to one of the speakers and ask them everything you're dying to ask them. But before we go to the break, we have a special announcement to make, and for that, I'm going to hand over the mic to my dear friends and colleagues, Robert and Dennis. Robert, are you ready? Not yet. It's got to do with this thing that we introduced last year. Full day conference, 2 tracks. Last year was our first edition. It was pretty amazing, especially for first edition. Maybe partially due to the nice animals in the artist zoo that accompanied us. 2018, there will be another conference, bigger and better, of course, as you always do when you're an ambitious event organizer. And tonight we're going to release the first batch of super early bird extra discount tickets, especially for you, my dear friends here in this venue. And to celebrate this fact, we have a little show for you, prepared for you. And I'm hoping that this show is about to start.
Hi guys, my name is Dennis. I work as a software developer in evolution gaming. Sometime I speak at conferences, sometime and I love it. And also I love help communities grow. This one or others, JavaScript communities. I really love JavaScript people and projects which come from a JavaScript environment. We do front end, back end, do some amazing things. So I think JavaScript is basically the best technology. And as the best people, we deserve best events, I think. Oh, with this idea in mind, we should have a best events. So we started to make this AmsterdamJS conference, and last year we did our best. So we did a nice website, and we invited really nice speakers, Christian Hellman, many of you know, and then Dustin Whittle from Uber, and then the guy as a manager of V8 project from Munich, Google, and a lot of other bright speakers. And very important thing is that there are a lot of speakers from Amsterdam and Netherlands to support projects done by community in Netherlands. Also, we picked a really nice venue. It was Amsterdam Zoo, Artis Magistra. It was really cool. Let me show you a bit of Okay. Yeah, we were putting speakers to cages and all this crazy stuff. It's really funny. And yeah, what we wanted to do is to announce that this year we are going to repeat. And we'll try to make a best conference for the best community. And we'll try to beat last year. So I'm not sure, should we go for aquarium or whatever for that? Or and whom we should invite for. But then the fact is that today we are going to start and to publish event on Eventbrite and to start super early bird ticket sale, which is going to be, I think, twice cheaper than a normal price for tickets. So it's a really good time to buy. And we announce it here for a community to give a chance to people who really want to attend. So this button, what it does, it actually publishes an event, and we are almost, see this progress bar? Right, event is online, and link is available at AmsterdamJS.com. I'm a super early bird, or by search of Eventbrite. So join us at the first week of June. It's somewhere in Amsterdam, good weather, good city, maybe good weather, but June is most likely. So we wait for you. Come.
All right, thank you for listening. Go check them out. Go check it out on your phone. get them while they're hot. It's time for a short break now, only 5 to 10 minutes. What time is it right now? So it's almost 8:30, so we will be back with the Fireside chat around 8:40 at latest, so make sure to return in time. Have a drink at the bar. Kan die mic aan? It's about time for us to come back with the second part of our program. So if everyone can please come back in. I know there has not been ample time to get a beer, but I hope everyone has managed to at least fetch one of them from the bar. All right. How many people do we think we're still missing? I do see a lot of people at the bar, but I'm not sure if they're all interested in JavaScript. Maybe can you check if we're kind of there? Yeah, I already announced, but yeah, because I'm quite excited about what's about to come. I'm quite honored by the fact that our Fireside Chat guest of tonight has agreed to join us for a nice and intimate interview. Because I'm not sure how many of you were familiar with what he's doing, but I checked his website and it mentioned something like, I think of myself as half programmer, half designer, and a bit of an entrepreneur. And then I thought like, okay, this bit of an entrepreneur to me sounds like a bit of an understatement, because he's got a pretty impressive track record. He's founded a software product boutique called Sofa a long time ago that got acquired by Facebook, and then he lived for a couple of years in Silicon Valley and returned to Amsterdam to co-found Framer, which is a next generation interactive design tool. You could call it like that, I guess. And they recently announced a massive Series A funding round, which basically puts them in a position to invent the future of user interface prototyping. I don't know which words to use to describe that, but probably Koen can do that himself a lot better. So I'm excited to hear his view on the relationship between design and development, Silicon Valley versus Amsterdam, and his approach in general to making things. So I would like to ask you to give a warm round of applause to Koen Bok and to our presenters, Rick and Nick.
Test. Thanks. Hello.
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 So now we can fight about the microphone. Awesome. Well, welcome, Koen. It's
Thank you very
awesome that you're here. Yeah, I think a lot of people in the industry have seen a part of your work and what you do. So I would like to ask you to maybe introduce, how would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, I think some people might have seen it, but I can explain a little bit what Framer is. My background is sort of it's like for my website that's old, but there is some truth to it that I kind of started in graphic design when I was younger. I learned programming in Perl back in the day and got kind of excited when finally Flash made me really, sort of gave me an environment to really play around with programming and graphics together. And from there on, I just kind of got addicted and then started like a startup, but it wasn't really a startup back in the day because I didn't know it was a startup, just a small company building stuff. And it just went on from there. So that's sort of where the mix comes in. I'm really interested in sort of an intersection between design and technology. I really like sort of human-computer interactive stuff, how humans interact with computers, but also really how people express themselves, being it like programmatically or through direct manipulation tools, or not really with dance, but like express themselves, express ideas through technology. I really like that part.
I could totally see that happen. Like the next generation of web developers is going to be a dance API.
I don't think that's really going to catch on.
Yeah. I mean, it'll do wonders for our health,
It would be a lot more fun to look at.
So I'm curious. You mentioned, I guess, Sofa just now as your first adventure into building a company and starting a business.
Yeah.
When you started that, when did you realize? It sounded like you were doing your stuff and it just kind of happened. When did you realize, and what happened where you were like, okay, this is actually a thing? Can you just describe that transition from, hey, I'm just doing what I like, to, oh shit, this is really a real thing here?
Yeah, and I think you described that pretty well. I think the moment that everything I always started with a side project. So basically I was working in a store and I was working with like a retail system and I hated it. And I thought, okay, I can make something better than this. But I had that about like 4 times a week and it almost never led anywhere. And for some reason, this specific thing actually got me to really make a small point of sale system based on Postgres, and it's really fun to make. And from there, I tried to sell it back to the company that I was working for, which was pretty naive, but and it didn't work. And then I found somebody who was just selling their stuff on the internet. So from there on, we're like, well, if we sell 1 copy, we have something that resembles a little company, and we could maybe turn this into something like a profession. It felt way more like a hobby to us.
You're saying we? I mean...
Yeah, so it was funny. This sounds weird, but I was looking for people that would also program, because and specifically the kind of stuff that I was building was I was making Mac desktop applications. And so 10 years ago in Amsterdam, nobody was really working on the Mac. It was Objective-C, and it was like kind of old Next Step people that got into web objects, sort of like this weird web framework that Apple got into. But it wasn't the sort of like iOS developer community or anything like the Ruby or the JavaScript community that you have now. So I was really looking for a buddy to help me to kind of, like spar with and build stuff with together. And at the company that I was working at, it was like the Apple store here in Amsterdam, there was one person, and I just felt that he could program. He couldn't, but I knew that he could do it. So
those are the best.
He stacked the coins in a certain way, and you were
like some people you just know, like there's, I don't know, you could just tell, like they're intellectual, they get math and all that stuff. So at some point I asked him, hey, you want to help me out? You want to start this software thing with me? And he's like, but I can't program. I'm like, yeah, you can program. And yeah, half a year later, he spent some time on it. He got really, really good. So that was a pretty cool moment. So I kind of like picked somebody that I liked, and we teach each other how to program. I taught him a little bit, and then he taught me a lot after that because he became a lot better than I did. And then like it's sort of when we started selling that first copy, we kind of had a company. And it didn't really feel like a real company. It just felt like another way to make a little bit of money on the side. But slowly, sort of the whole internet thing started to happen, and you see a bunch of people, doing proper startups. And at that point, we were like, shit, this could be like a proper job, right? Like I don't have to learn anything else, which I didn't.
So I'm kind of trying to imagine what happened there and how the two of you were working. So what were your roles, and how did you define who was responsible for what as you were like progressing in your startup?
Yeah, that was just, I guess, how any startup still starts. We kind of have that too now. Like you kind of pick some work that you want to work on based on what's most important to get the project forward according to your goals. And there's also a bunch of intrinsic motivation that comes into play, especially for both programmers and designers. Like if you have a wave that you can catch to work on something that you want to work on, that's way more efficient than procrastinate, while you obviously have some way to turn procrastination into something productive.
Yeah,
But
just redefine your procrastination as a company, and it's just works.
that's another way of looking at it. But so to us, we kind of like try to catch those waves, and I know where we're kind of living, and it starts to define what you're building. So for us, that was like whenever we could show what we built to people and they were working with it, that was the best feeling. So the moment, I mean, this was just like the little point of sale system in the beginning. When we saw the first few people use it, yeah, we kind of knew that's gonna get really addictive.
And how did your what was your partnership with your business partner like? Was it like, equal for everything, or were you this Mr. CEO man?
Yeah, I don't think really we had titles back then, but the way that we set it up is we were with the three of us, but I did a whole bunch of work in the beginning, and then Dirk joined later on, and then we found somebody else who was a really good icon designer, Jasper. So we both joined with the three, and they basically had half of the company, and I had half of the company. But this is actually a really good tip when you start a company. If you start a company, you do 50-50, you always should give away like a very little percentage to somebody that you both trust. Because 80 to 90% of the companies, they sort of like fail in the first year because the co-founders get into an argument and there's no decision. And no decision means that your company is dead. And both the co-founders also have sort of like the power to kill the company, because if one walks away, then the other one is just left with 50%. So vesting is kind of another trick for this. But if you have somebody that you both trust, you almost never have to use them, because you just don't get in a fight, because you know then you kind of give your power away to a third person to make the decision for you. So that was a really good trick for us.
And it was an advisor, or there was somebody that was your icon designer?
No, this was some advisor that we had, somebody who was in finance that didn't really know too much about what we're doing, but we both trusted him, so worked. So we never had to use him either.
You used a professional coin flipper.
I guess so, and I guess that also helped, because we were both like, we're never gonna ask him, right? He doesn't even really know what we're doing, so.
That's awesome. So you were talking about sort of catching the waves. Do you remember like a night when you went home and you thought, okay, today was an amazing day and we really, hit the nail on the head? It was just like, okay, we did it. Can you just describe? I'm sure there was a moment like that, and you were like extremely happy, and you thought, okay, this is really happening now. Okay, do you remember such a day?
I mean, it's all like it's a whole ocean of waves in that regard. So I think you have waves in the categories that you finally solve this problem that you thought about for a long time, and it could be like a very technical thing that you wanted to solve, but also in our case, it was mostly like a really elegant way to solve a problem for the user. So make something really complex understandable. So I can remember, for example, in this category, like we had to figure out how to deal with two orders at different computers being edited at the same time. So sort of the concurrency in users. And then we kind of relied on the social aspect to solve it rather than the technical aspect. But it took us a while to not do it technically, because that's the tool that you have. So you first try that, right? So you start making sort of like a concurrency thing and locking, and then finally you go like, no, these people should just talk to each other, and that will kind of solve it. And so there's a few of those. I think when I started, I really wanted to win an Apple Design Award, because it's like the nerdy Oscars for interface design. And I once met somebody who had one, and it's like Apple gives out these prizes once a year for the best software, mostly the best looking software, to be honest. And there's one company in Europe that actually won one, and I was there once, and like they're these like really nice little cubes, and I'm like, man, if someday I can have one of those. So that was like a big way for us. We won one of those at some point, just randomly. I never expected that to happen. But
For the point of sale software.
For the point of sale software, which really sounds ridiculous, because nobody was using it except for a few store owners. But Apple liked it so much that they gave us like an Apple Design Award for it. Then the next year we started making a little bit more developer tools. So this was sort of our hit product, and it was it was called Versions, and it was a Subversion API or a Subversion GUI. So Subversion was the sort of de facto versioning system, but the API was pretty hard to use, the command line interface. And by just putting a really nice GUI on top, like a lot of people would start using it, but also graphic design agencies, and like sort of we had the NASA using it, and a bunch of people you wouldn't really expect. And that was the second year, and then again we won an Apple Design Award. So now we feel pretty good about ourselves at this point. We were like, shit, yeah, this is getting really serious.
Yeah, what did that do to your personality?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm saying you kind of like through these waves and like being a little bit younger and having some of that success, you get kind of cocky and at phases, but it corrects itself really quickly if you surround yourself with the right people. And I think, you know, being Dutch a little bit and having like good grounded Dutch friends helps in that regard too.
Yeah, can you speak a bit more about surrounding yourself with the right people? I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, it's always. I've been very lucky with that mostly. I've never had. I mean, there have been troubles in the previous company with, you know, you set it up in a way. Everything you do for the first time isn't like the best way to set it up, right? So we had a few problems. One specific one, for example, is that if you give everything away, all the shares up front, and you have new really great people that come in, they're never gonna sort of feel appreciated the same as the original founders. Now, another thing that I sometimes found is that original founders tend to maybe become a little bit less excited about the trajectory of the company at some point. So now you have situations where people that work way harder than sort of the original people, but they'll never get as much stock, and that feels weird. So there's all these cool mechanisms around startups that you can kind of learn that can really avoid this. And it seems like venture capital bullshit, and it kind of is a little bit too. But there's good tricks to sort of change the dynamics to get everybody motivated all the time. So I got a little bit more excited about that today than I used to be.
Can you share one of the tricks to have people be motivated?
Well, I think vesting, for example, is like a good one in this, and it gets pretty technical here, but it's about ownership, and the ownership is really much connected to like how invested you are in the company. So vesting is a sort of a typical thing that if you start working for a larger company, you get a bunch of shares, and you don't get like a quarter of the shares after the first year. This is the most typical setup. And then each year after that, you get another quarter. So the longer you stay, the more you're going to get. But you can also do this for founders. So, for example, I have this with my co-founder now. If I, didn't like Framer that much and I would quit in the first year, I would still have some shares, but I didn't vest the rest of my shares. And he can continue with the company and give that to somebody else who wants to step up in the company or get a new external co-founder. And that's a good way to protect everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that sounds very, very sensible. And I think it's called reverse vesting or something for founders, or just normal vesting.
Yeah, I don't know. I know that there's reverse vesting too, but I'm not if that. Oh yeah, it's because you already have it.
You already had it, and you gave it away, and it's sort of. I think it's called reverse vesting for founders.
Could be.
But anyway,
I think I have that.
So, so
what do you think? Go ahead.
So my question would be like, okay, so you transitioned from Sophie, you have won a bunch of design awards, and then Facebook. Could you?
Yeah, so I'm kind of telling the design awards story because it gives me a bridge to explain how that Facebook thing went. And you got to understand, like the way that I look at this stuff is that it's hard work. Don't get me wrong. Like we put a lot of hours into programming and designing, but it's also like crazy lucky. I mean, who could imagine that like some interface design technical company gets bought by a social network or something to fix design? That's just crazy. So, and most of the things that I experienced in my career that I consider, now maybe the things that the external people consider my biggest successes are mostly luck, honestly. So with this, it's just that we start winning these Apple Design Awards and the iPhone comes out and we're really good at interface design at this point. So we create all these little icons that everybody's using. So all the bigger companies start looking at us. We don't have any money though at this point. But
so you made an open source icon pack or something?
No, so we started contributing to open source projects that averagely don't have the best icons, and we started making icons for them. So one that's still being used quite a lot is Transmission for the Mac. So it's a BitTorrent client, and it's like a little gear shift. It's now 10 years old, I think, the icon. And there's a few of those that we made. Plus the Apple Design Awards, plus our own software. And now all these larger companies start looking at us and just, looking at our work, sending emails. And we sometimes attend these events. So this specific one was South by Southwest. But we have no money. We have a little bit of money for the tickets and then maybe like $400 for the entire week. So in this specific case, Facebook invited us for dinner, and I remember that the only thing that I can really remember about that dinner is walking into that fancy restaurant and go like, I hope they pay, because I had no money. It was kind of a weird dinner because like we were now sitting with a bunch of Facebook designers, and normally people always wanted to talk about our work and how we worked and how we got really good at this interface design stuff. But these guys were kind of, it felt different, right? So they were kind of feeling us out a little bit, and then they paid for the whole dinner. So we were like, yeah, this feels awkward.
If they pay for dinner.
Yeah, I mean, but like it was too fancy of a place for me. I'd never been in a restaurant like that. So I was like, whoa. I guess it's like a month or two later, and we suddenly get an email from Mark Zuckerberg. And now I wasn't a big Facebook fan, to be honest, but they just shipped they just had the movie out. So I knew about that. I didn't have a Facebook account. And honestly, my first response is like, I looked around in the company. I'm like, guys, don't fuck with me. It's like, it's like who's joking? But it turned out.
How big was the team at the time?
Maybe 12 people.
Okay.
Yeah, and mostly like 50-50 designers, engineers, and then we had like one person doing support. And we were doing well. So we have 4 products at this point, and they're making a little bit of money, just enough to get by, but like we're not getting rich off it. But we're having a lot of fun. And we can sometimes go to South by Southwest on a budget, which is cool too. So Zuck mails us, and we're like, all right, there's a phone number in here. What do we do? So we call him, and like we're on the phone for like 2 hours with him. He's doing the whole pitch about Facebook, and he's like, well, I like you guys. You guys should probably visit. Why don't you take your best designers and fly out here, and we'll talk further. And we're like, geez, okay. So we go to Menlo Park or Palo Alto, where it's based. And in the airplane, or actually at the airport, we have to make our Facebook accounts, right? Because it looks weird if you show it. So we create Facebook accounts, put like profile pictures in and stuff. And so we go there. And in the airport, we're kind of naive at this point still, right? Like I don't really know that we're running a startup. I couldn't even spell the word entrepreneur. And so in the airplane, we're talking. So what do you think they want? Right? Like, do you think they want a partnership maybe? Or maybe they want to do a small investment? Or so next day we arrive and we walk up to the desk, and it's still like the old campus that they have, but it's already pretty big, like 2,000 people or something. And we walk to the receptionist and we're like, hey, we're here from SOFA. And she goes like, oh, you're here for the acquisition. We're like, all right, so that's clear.
Now we know.
So apparently they have those talks like twice a week. So like she was pretty forward about that. And from there on, it's just like, I mean, it's easy to get excited about that, right? You walk around and it's just like, you're in Silicon Valley. We've been there a few times. And to be honest, it has some bad sides as well. But like, it's just so exciting, the whole vibe at this office. And everybody's like pretty good that you talk to. And you can see where they're going. And it's this guy from the movie. And like, it all helps. So yeah, we just thought, okay, let's see how far we can get with this. And then, so we started negotiating for a week or two. And then after a while, we got all the numbers good and sort of like all the packages for the employees. And we're like, okay, let's do it. Let's go to Silicon Valley. And I'll say one other thing about it, something that I only realized after reflecting back onto my first startup, and I got into this problem with the second startup again a little bit. So it's hard to sometimes take your own advice too. But if people come to me in the Netherlands for like startup advice, then they're always thinking about, should I go after and play the VC game? And I know you have some experience with this too, and it's kind of a hard question because you know you're gonna give ownership away, and you kind of have to learn about fundraising, and fundraising itself isn't really fun. And there's something really good about starting like a boutique business or like something for yourself that makes good money. It's kind of small, but you're serving a bunch of really great clients. But the thing that I realized in hindsight is that I kind of had a company like that. SOFA was doing really well. We were making enough money to get by. You know, at some point we would make like a nice amount of money. You could see that happening in the future. But if you start a startup and you're not really sure that you want to do that, and you take that trajectory, you're going to do it for a very long time. And the delta of change each year is getting smaller and smaller. So the chance that you're getting bored with it is getting bigger and bigger. And a really good reason for us to take venture money, or for anyone to take venture money, is that either the company goes like this or it crashes. And it is this force function of you to change enough about your company each year to still keep it interesting enough, or to crash and stop. And stopping as an entrepreneur is really hard.
Yeah, and then also you have to realize opportunity cost, right? Because the slow decay is opportunity cost of not doing something else.
Yes.
And that opportunity cost can be gigantic, because you have to compare the opportunity cost to what if you had a successful company in the 2 years that you were sort of, not going in the right direction. Well, calculate what you would make in an exit, and that's your opportunity cost.
Yeah, but I think the opportunity costs mostly time, right? Because, for example, if you want to do another startup, it's just easier when you're younger, and time at some point becomes a way more valuable resource than money. And I see way too many entrepreneurs just holding on too long to the same ID that's not really going anywhere. And it's hard to say, because some IDs take 5 years of going nowhere before they catch on. So there's always a reason to continue, but it's not really bad to fail. It's great to sort of like gracefully exit one ID and go into the next. Counts for side projects, also counts for companies, as long as you're doing it gracefully.
No, yeah, I agree. The way I see a startup is that you got a shot at testing your idea in the market.
Yeah.
And if that fails, you should do a new one, essentially. That's the way I see it. Like, if your idea execution fails, you can pivot maybe once, but you don't have to keep.
Yeah. And running out of money is a really good way to force yourself to stop.
Yes, absolutely.
And that is sort of like a really good part about the VC stuff. And a really bad part about an entrepreneur is that you have to be so crazy to start with the ID, so risk averse, that you put so much effort into convincing yourself that it's good, that it's really hard to switching yourself to convincing to stop.
Yeah, no, that's the hardest thing for entrepreneurs, for sure. So can you tell me a little bit about how you moved on from Facebook into Framer, and your how your relationship with VCs in that sense?
Yeah. So starting Framer was just a side project at Facebook, honestly. At Facebook, I had the option to become an individual contributor or a manager. And this is cool about these larger companies. Facebook, for example, makes sure that they pay individual contributors the same amount as managers, because mostly what happens in large companies is that if you are a really good engineer, you can make up to a certain amount of money. But then the only way to make more money is becoming a manager. So all your best engineers end up being managers, and some of them are really shit. But then they're never going to switch back to becoming an engineer again, and you lose them forever. So companies like Facebook and Apple and Google, they have these two individual tracks. So you can either be an individual contributor or a manager, and you can kind of jump around to see what you like better, which is a really good way of approaching it. Now, after running a company for 5-6 years, I was kind of done with managing. So I became an individual contributor. And I was a product designer, and the first project that I did was the first version of Facebook Mobile Messenger. That was a small project back in the day. It's now pretty big. And my work was basically working with, Mark was very involved with all these decisions. So he's like pretty big into product. So basically he would give us an assignment. So solve this specific problem or make me a proposal for a mobile messaging app. We would go off with like a small product design team, and then I would be in the room with him, and I would present sort of how we would do it with like all these other people in the room that are like directors and like not makers, more and more once the company grew bigger and bigger. And we would present it, and the way that we would present this interactive work would be, there's like a beamer at the end of like a screen at the end of the table, and I would have Photoshop open, and I would have a bunch of mocks, and I would go, well, Mark, if the user logs in, they see this, and then if when they click that button, wait for it, and I switch to a different image, I go like, well, then they see this, and the whole room goes like, uh-huh. But that they have to kind of figure out what happens in between, right? And the longer I'm at Facebook, the better the devices start to get. So suddenly we have like really nice performance on iOS. So people start playing with friction and with like sort of physics. And these things you just can't express in Photoshop. So really quickly for us, it became sort of a nice thing to start playing around with a better way to express these IDs. Like what you want to have is really good prototyping for cheap. Because what you can do then instead is just hand over your phone, and then people can judge an ID not just by how it looks, but by how it feels. And how an app feels is getting really important if the devices can deliver these super immersive experiences. So going back to sort of the first company, I really like building tools, and I always loved Adobe as a company because they were making these super cool creative tools that I used to, I learned basically being a designer in Photoshop, so that's pretty close to my heart. But I also wanted my own Adobe. So the moment that we kind of saw that, I was looking at Jorn, who was at my previous company, and he was with me at Facebook, and we kind of were talking about maybe co-founding the next company together, and we're like, shit, this could be like a way to build our own creative tools company, because Adobe's not really seeing this. And that led to the decision to quit Facebook and start a new startup.
And how is the timeline as opposed to the rest of the market? Because there's a whole boom of rapid prototyping tools in the last couple of years.
Yeah, so
that was before?
Yeah, it's all before that, which is crazy because like most of the interactive tools that you see now are like less than 3 years old. And we started with the origination of the Framer ID was about like 3.5 years old. So the only one that I think is as old is Origami, which is based on Quartz Composer. And Quartz Composer was this weird sort of demo app for Apple to do visual programming and then to sort of do demos on the GPU. And it was so cool that people would use it for prototyping. And basically half of the first iPhone was prototyped with Quartz Composer hooked up to a bunch of G5 Macs. And so that was the other like really old sort of flexible app that everybody was using, but Apple wasn't really keeping it up, so it sort of died off a little bit.
So I want to go back to the moment where you were presenting the first version of Messenger in front of this room. How did you know that you're doing the right thing? Was it just like you gut feeling? You think this is the direction we need to head, or did you have like a plan? Like how did you?
I mean, you mean for the app itself?
Yeah, like I'm kind of thinking you're sitting there in a room. There's a bunch of really important people, and you need to be really convinced about that. What you think is right is actually right. And so how did you get a sense for this is the path forward, and this is the right direction?
Yeah, that's just confidence after doing something for 5 or 6 years. At that point, I've been building
and 2 Apple Awards.
I mean, that provides some confidence as well. No, but like I was a product designer at that point for 5 or 6 years, so I was still afraid a little bit. I'm always a little bit. You're always a little bit afraid if you're taking the right approach, like internally for yourself, because you're not entirely sure. It's just being a good product designer means that I've done it now for maybe like 15 years, and I still know that if I go into user testing, I'm wrong half of the times. That's just the fact of being a product designer, because you have to predict human psychology with a million variables around them. It's just undoable. Like it's not like programming where you have like full control over everything, all the inputs and outputs.
Are you talking about web programming or?
Maybe it's like web programming. No.
So where do you get your inspiration? I'm sure like that's so you're collecting input somehow from somewhere to paint your picture. What inspires you?
Yeah, you surround yourself with people that kind of like share your ideas, but not enough to like get into this excessive sameness thing, right? But you find a few people where you can bounce around ideas without having to explain the full thing. So if you work for long enough with people or you have a good click, you may mostly need 1 or 2 sentences, and they're like, I get what you're saying. And then you can really quickly like iterate through ideas and validate them sort of as a first pass. And from there, you just hype yourself up and convince yourself that you can convince the rest of the world to build this thing.
And in terms of your original team, like the sofa team, was that ripped apart and everybody spread around, or did you keep your people?
No, actually, their strategy, and we talked a lot about this in hindsight. Their strategy was they felt like some of their teams didn't have enough talent, and they just saw us as sort of like a talent tree. So they plucked us off one by one and just inserted them in different teams. And I don't think that was a really good idea, because if you build that thing up where you can go really quickly together, like it's just a shame to not use that. And I'm not saying that like if you ever bring a team on or you combine 2 teams together that you should keep them all together, but at least pair them up, or like pair a good designer and an engineer up, or 2 engineers that are very sort of complementary. I would always do that.
All right. So let's move forward a little bit then to the starting of Framer. Okay, you saw an opportunity, like prototyping tools. But what made you choose this particular way of doing things?
So I think the biggest reason is that you need to have sort of an ID to where you know that people need something, right? Like people need to buy something. You need to validate that first. And the way that we did it is that at Facebook, I was already playing with a small JavaScript framework to do prototyping. But that meant that you had to set up like auto refresh for the browser. You need a browser and sort of a Photoshop importer thingy that I wrote, and your text editor. And that's not a really, still JavaScript kind of has this problem a little bit that the setup costs really sort of like sometimes make you not work on something because you're like, shit, no, I don't feel like starting a new project. I'll work on the older thing. So it was a cool thing to play around with, but the first thing that we thought we'd start with is why don't we close the feedback loop for designers? So why don't we make sure that designers have direct feedback when they start typing JavaScript and they see what's happening on the phone? So kind of the auto refresh a little bit. And the second one is we wrap it all up in a nice Mac desktop app. So you can just I have an ID, new document, and go. And we kind of started there. So I programmed that in maybe like a month or month and a half. And we just put it out there, and it just took off. So all our old friends at Facebook started using it. Some of these people now moved on to Google or some of the other companies, so they introduced it there. So we had this really cool, maybe like 100, 200 user base from the beginning. But they're all designers that are making, products for these large companies. So you see all this cool work sort of coming out of it. And at that point, we felt, oh shit, we're onto something.
And in this context, who's we?
Me and Jorn. So Jorn is the first employee that I had at the previous company, but he wasn't my co-founder. And then at Facebook, he was also working with me, but we're both
the icon designer,
designers.
right?
Huh?
The icon designer.
Yeah, he's an icon designer. He's a really good product designer. So he's also really good at like thinking through how products should work.
And how was your experience dealing with code fear? Like a lot of designers have like, oh, this is code, and then they'll just mentally block it as not their thing.
Funny. I thought you meant something else. Because like one of the things that I deal with as code fear is like not daring to publish my code because I feel like people like you might read it and go like, this guy is bad. I can't believe it. So that's another thing, but you deal with that by just uploading it and just chill out. And then mostly is all right. Code fear is basically the thing that's still holding us back. So the idea that all Framer is based on, or a large part of Framer, is that direct manipulation, so the canvas that you have in Photoshop, is a great way to express yourself if everything is static. Basically, you could call it like declarative without any logic. So if you want to draw a circle and have a bunch of stuff and hierarchy, you can express that really well in Photoshop or programs like Photoshop. But if you mix in time and you want to do like interactivity and animation, now you can't really use the canvas for that anymore. And this is the thing that most designers still have to get over. And that's why they like making images so much, because they know that like beyond just images, they need to learn something that's an order of magnitude more complex. Now, if you look at all the ways to express interactivity and logic, you have a lot of ways. You can do it through a GUI, you can do it through visual programming, you can do it through code. And there's probably a lot more ways that I don't really know about to do it. But we had a way, programming, that's been working for 30 or 40 years, and it's very expressive and powerful. So my idea was like, all right, we're just going to teach all the designers to learn how to code. Now, that turned out to be a little bit harder than I thought. But it is really cool to see if it works.
Maybe sometimes we could also just wait for a new generation of designers,
Well, this is happening, right? Like the way that designers of my age define design versus programmers is very different than a 20-year-old. They don't really think about design and engineering in that way. They just want to make stuff. And that's a combination of, Sketch, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then you can build something.
So are you noticing many young people being more open to this approach?
Yeah, I would say that our audience is mostly skewed towards young people. They seem to also have like an easier time picking it up, and they probably have more time to learn as well. So I definitely feel that if we would have started Framer 5 years later, the adoption rate would be a lot higher even, which is cool. But at least we're like, you're like timing is one of the hardest things with IDs. So I knew we probably wouldn't get that right.
Yeah, they say in Silicon Valley, I think they say that being too early is just as bad as being wrong.
Yeah, I guess we have a little of that. But that's not bad because you can pivot.
Or just wait it out until you're right.
Yeah, sit on it. No. So we had a few approaches there that are kind of interesting. So we played a lot around with trying to make code easier to learn. So we came up with, did anybody here use Dreamweaver back in the day, maybe? Ah, cool. So you know what I'm talking about. So I thought about Dreamweaver, and one of the cool things there is you can learn how to code, well, it's HTML, but by doing direct manipulation, right? So, and then it had this really unintended feature where the HTML that it would write was so bad that you would want to learn how to code. Now, that's the part that we didn't really replicate. But we did replicate, we now parse the code, we build an AST, and we let you sort of program with a properties panel. And so you can insert new layer, it will write the code for you. We recognize the layer, you can click a thing, and then a properties panel pops in, we call it autocode. You can actually manipulate the stuff on the canvas, and it will update the code. And that definitely helped. So we saw adoption grow, but it needed to grow an order of magnitude. And instead it grew by like 20% or something. And we also saw that once people knew how to program, they didn't really use it anymore. It was a really cool demo feature.
Did you figure out why?
Yeah, it's hard to really answer that. I think it's just faster at some point if you are able to go to just not take your hand off the keyboard. And that's also why programs like Vim and Emacs are still so popular, I think. It's my best guess. But it doesn't really matter because like we can still retain code as a really good way to express these things and stay very flexible. But the other idea that we had from the beginning is that the way that we use both code and direct manipulation, or direct manipulation and programmatic manipulation, could probably blend it in some better way to express IDs. I even feel that if I'm writing a React component and I'm typing up, some HTML structure in the GSX, like in the render function, I'm like, yeah, I should probably just draw this, right? Or if I'm typing up CSS, like, why am I not just like visually doing this on a canvas? So that's a really interesting approach where if you could mix direct manipulation with programmatic manipulation in a little bit more blended way, I think that could be very powerful.
I think the word is projectional editing.
Well, that's what we need to build then.
Yes, can you speak a bit more about like where do you see this space move in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah.
Just paint a picture of where you see us, how you see us work.
Yeah, I'll start with like how we are selling our company to both investors, but also to designers, sort of the metaphors that we pick. So in our space, if you look at design tools, and who here is like a Photoshop or Sketch user sometimes? All right, oh, okay, that's easy. So, and we're all programmers, right? Yes, okay, I assume. So we know both these models and how powerful they can be. Now, if you want to capture the designer market today, and you think how Sketch did that, which is also a Dutch product, by the way, which is crazy, they just made a better version of Photoshop, right? They looked at, okay, Photoshop is a photo editing tool that's being used for interface design, so why don't we take all the interface design features, innovate on that, and outcompete them? And it took them 8 years, but they did just that, and now they kind of won. So now we have a few different tools, which one of them is funny. It's again an Adobe app, and they're trying to outcompete their Photoshop now. It's called Adobe XD. You have Figma, which is another one that's really cool, and there's a few other ones. But if you think about them, they're all still better versions of Photoshop. And we don't really think that the future of design tools is going to look like a better version of Photoshop. I more look at game tools. So if I look at Unity, what you see is sort of like a platform where you can express yourself with specific editors for a level or on a canvas. But you also have programming that you can mix in. You can put it all together. You can build a component around it. You can share that component. And I think a platform like that, sort of, I would say an IDE for design, would probably be the future of design tools. But it's something that we can't really copy from somebody, so we have to innovate that. And one of the biggest, most powerful parts of it, but also the hardest, is do this blend between direct manipulation and programmatic manipulation.
And in terms of, are you going to go all the way to app building, or do you see prototyping as a field that just stops somewhere?
No, I think I want to go all the way to prototyping, but I haven't had a good idea for it yet. So typically, a few of our competitors, what they try to do is they sell their product as like a prototyping tool that lets you build production code. And what they do is they build a cross-platform runtime. Sometimes they use their own little language on top. They build like an animation toolkit on top. And then they build a whole suite of widgets. And then they have all that. And then they walk into Facebook and they go like, hey, you guys want to use our widgets and our our runtime and our animation toolkit instead of whatever's native on the platform or whatever you guys have yourself. That's never going to work. Plus, you would have to raise like, I don't know, $20 million to do it well. And mostly sort of cross-platform toolkits never give you the best interface experience. They always give you like a decent experience for cheap. So that's not really where we want to be. Like for those reasons, I didn't want to do that. But there's some really interesting parts about we prototype in JavaScript and we now also do all the production code in JavaScript. So reusing at least parts of that should be very possible. And I think approaches like React Native that have a little bit of a different balance where, you know, you still kind of program in JavaScript and the widgets that you use are kind of native and you can expand on them by like making a widget on each platform still native and then sort of instruct them from JavaScript. I think that's probably a really cool model to play around with.
So I want to switch gears to Amsterdam. So you were in the Silicon Valley and then you decided to start a new company here in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, it's multiple reasons. So one, most of your visa is tied to your job. So the moment that you quit, you have to leave the country within 1 day, which is fun.
That happened to you?
That happened to me. There's other ways to get a visa. It's not it's hard, but there's ways to get it. So we kind of like thought a little bit about, you know, should we go back and shouldn't we? And then you get into like a mix of things. So of course, like family and stuff, that's one thing. But also, I like Europe a little bit more, just in terms of living, because one thing that I felt really much, and this is just for Silicon Valley, to be honest, but I always wanted to live in a place where everybody around me would understand my job or what I did. And in Amsterdam growing up, that was always pretty tough, right? It's like, I'm not even talking about that people don't want to talk to you at parties if you start talking about what you really like, but just like generally people understanding what you do or what excites you.
We have Twitter now to do that, right?
It's solved. No, but it's great. Like these days, it's very different, right? There's many people that are like excited about these same ideas. So, but back then it was a lot harder. So I always dreamed of going to a place where everybody would get that. But once I was in it, it felt like there was no escape. So literally, I'm sitting in Dolores Park, and there's like two grandmothers in front of me, and they're discussing the Facebook IPO and what kind of technology they're using. And you're like, this is driving me crazy, because like for me, it works a little bit. If I hear if I get caught around the same subjects over and over, I just don't really get new ideas anymore. And I think that's probably the downside of Silicon Valley. It's really hard to escape that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we've gone to Silicon Valley as well, and there was this first like, oh, everybody understands what we do. What the hell? And then there's like sort of an emergence of a semi-monoculture as well.
Yeah, for sure.
But there's also really, really inspiring people there. I mean, one of the most inspiring ones for me was Brett Victor. And you know, his talk, like design on principle, like first principles. And I wanted to ask you, like, what are your first principles?
Yeah, and I thought about that, and I don't have such a good answer as he has. He's one of these sort of super explorative designers that's sort of like thinking about 10 steps ahead in the future and without any constraints. And all his ideas come from Xerox PARC, basically. So he's basically kind of pissed off that all the cool stuff that they invented there, that we ended up with very different ideas that are much worse in his opinion. So, for example, the small talk paper, just that thing by itself, you can give 10 presentations about that, and everybody here would be, now that's a great idea. I wish we thought of that sooner. but it's from the 70s, right? So this is his whole spiel, and he's amazing at explaining that and sort of reiterating like how good that stuff is.
His research is also very, very detailed.
Yeah.
If you see the way he explores ideas, it's very detailed. But I like the first principles, because I thought about it as well. Like, okay, what are your first principles then?
Yeah.
That's actually a very tough question.
Yeah, and I like the one from Elon Musk too, where he goes like all the way to the basics. So he asks like, all right, but why? So he sort of like tries to figure out the fundamental numbers behind everything, and then like tries to make business assumptions on that. And so the thing that I think it's more about ideas and creativity that I'm more interested in. And for that, I was thinking I can kind of give the same answer as I do to designers. So often people ask like, what makes a designer great? And the thing that I see what the best designers have is they can be very entrenched in a project for weeks and weeks, and they can sit down and within 10 seconds they can, take 20 centimeters of distance from their screen, and they can force a first view perspective on themselves. So they can experience their design that they worked on for weeks as if they saw it for the first time. And that is really, really hard. So
Wow, that's pretty selective amnesia. That's
well, I mean,
can you learn that stuff?
Well, no, but you can drink. So there might be like some of those tricks for it too, but like all the best designers that I've seen were able to do that. And I think in a way I don't have that. I can't force myself that. Well, maybe also because programming is a little bit more complex in that way that's a little bit harder to do. But I do try it, and the way that I do it is I explain my problems to others. So the rubber ducky mentality, that's one of my tricks. And if I don't get something, or I feel like I'm kind of stuck in an idea, I just explain it to people that might not even have the solution, but just like through analyzing through it, I can kind of force that perspective upon to myself. So it's not the first principle, it's more of like a trick, but it's a really important trick to kind of stay creative and force yourself out of these sort of loops that you stay in, these local maximum that you get stuck in if you're working on a problem. And I think that applies to technology as well.
Awesome. Okay, so I think we have time for some questions from the audience. This one's working again now.
Does anyone have a question for Koen?
Can ask me anything, startups, technology, whatever.
It doesn't work anymore.
That's okay.
Have you seen
Hello? This one works.
We have one question here.
Yay. Test 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
I need to switch batteries before the show, man.
So you mentioned these problems with engineers, like really good engineers tend to be managers because like that's the normal thinking of corporate mentality. And also there's like a limit of like how much money you can make as an engineer.
Yeah.
What would your advice be to a good engineer who sucks at managing but who wants to make a lot of money?
Well, that's a very clear, specific question.
Yeah, no, I think you can more easily every day find a company that respects that and that allows for that. So I think all the great companies are doing it already. I think a lot of startups are copying it. So if your company doesn't allow for that, I would not leave immediately. I would just first maybe propose to them that those tracks would be equal. And then if they don't, then I think there's many really great places for you to work as an engineer and make as much as a manager. I've seen engineers at Facebook make over $1 million a year, which is way more than like a level 7 product manager would make, or like even a director. So it's pretty common now in Silicon Valley, to be honest. So I would try to sort of fix your company first, and if it can't be fixed, then you exit.
Yeah, so I'll try it again.
Or come work with us. We're looking for good people.
I was waiting for that.
Yeah, so the Silicon Valley companies that have 2 tracks is a big thing, right? Like as a developer, you're allowed to be a really great developer. You don't have to become a manager. So if you're a good developer, it's a really good strategy to just become a better developer and keep at it until you figure out what you want to do with being a great developer, because those are, I think, more rare than good managers.
I think there is in ladder you have also tech lead and then solution architect and maybe something else, manager of solution architects. It still works. But my question was, you mentioned about the mix of programming and graphical tools for prototyping, designing, doesn't matter. What do you think about React Sketch from Airbnb?
Yeah, that's an interesting explorative thing, and it's very marketable because itself is fun, but I think people overestimate what it is, really. So if you mention React and Sketch in one sentence, a lot of people on the internet tend to go crazy. So there's something there that people want. They just don't know exactly what. So to explain, somebody built a React renderer in Sketch. So basically what you can do is you can define a React component with a subset of CSS, and then you can render it in Sketch, and then it's there. And then you can't really do anything else with it. So it's interesting if you, for example, want to build a design system where you retain like all the original design in code, and now you can, so you don't have to do that in Sketch symbols or anything. But I wonder how useful it is. So one of the interesting things that we're exploring is that if you draw a React component on a canvas, it should probably be the same React component as you use in production. And if there would only be a canvas or like a graphical tool built in React, then you could do that. Now we have that, like our graphical editor is completely built in React. So this is sort of our plan for the next steps is next to a text layer, a bitmap layer, or like, you know, an artboard, you could also have a React layer that could render any React component, and they could contain other React components that you also draw in the editor. And now it gets pretty interesting because you really open up a way to sort of draw with components that you also use in production, which kind of closes the loop a little bit more between prototyping and production. So that's sort of the next step that we'll take with Framer.
Anyone else? Over there.
Hi. Yeah, really
Hi.
cool story about Framer. I have more of a business question.
Go ahead.
So you guys raised Series A, 8 million. What's your biggest challenge right now to grow or or what's the most difficult challenge that you have right now?
Finding people and finding a new office.
The office is difficult there.
Most problems, like it seems like if you get money that you'd never have those problems, but it turns out that you only have those problems when you have money because you have to spend it, right? Like you have to turn that money into growth for the product, but you also really want to be picky for the people that you want to work with. Like they need to be good and really enthusiastic about the kind of tools that we're working on. Now for us, I think we have a bunch of really great properties to find engineers because if you're interested in, and now I'm going on this hiring thing, but if you're interested in like graphics technologies, text editors, languages, parsers, all that stuff, we're a really good place to work. So it's a nice problem set. But then even still, it's not that you can just like snip your fingers and there's just 10 great people showing up. So honestly, that is one of the hardest things. Also because my work starts to become a lot more hiring and interviewing. I think longer term, it's picking strategies, right? So if you're at a Series A point, then you have a few really clear things. You kind of have to triple your revenue each year, preferably more. So you have like pretty clear assignments, but you probably have 100 ideas on how to do that. And picking the right one and putting enough sort of resources behind that one and not behind something else, that's probably the toughest decisions. You have a few chances though, especially if you raised a good Series A, then you can mess up 2 or 3 times, but not much more than that. So the pressure's on.
Thanks. Anyone else? Ooh, now they're coming. I'm going to the back first.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm a designer, and I had a chance to look at the Framer, and my question is, so what's the reason, me as a designer, to invest my time to learn Framer instead of for instance, React? So,
Yeah.
So I can use React, and it would be kind of production code that can be used, but in a Framer, when I had a look,
I can summarize the question, I think. Yeah, so why would you invest time learning Framer if you could invest time in learning React as a designer? And that's a pretty honest question, and I think Framer and React will get a lot closer in the near future. But honestly, I don't think you're learning either Framer or React. I think you're learning JavaScript. So that's kind of the same for the two, and I would definitely learn JavaScript as a designer because it's like the most transferable skill on the internet, and it will change your career, like guaranteed. And whether you do it through Framer and then go into React over time, or you start with React, but for some use cases you use Framer because it's just so easy to get started and get up and running, or you get like the direct feedback, that doesn't really matter. It's just a matter of choice. But learn JavaScript, that's my tip.
Great. Maybe one or two more questions in the front here. Yeah.
Yeah, you can shout.
Yeah, so you mentioned that at some point it's not money, but it's time that you have a shortage of. I'm always very interested to hear then, if you had more time, what would you be putting it into?
The same.
So your startup?
Yeah, my startup. I mean, I really picked this. So the luxury that you have, so after Facebook, when I quit, for the first time in my career, I could spend a little time thinking about what I wanted to do. And before that, you have a startup, you can't really do that. And then you get acquired, so you can't really do that. So now I gave myself a couple of months to sort of think about it. I got to 6 weeks before I started working again, ultimately. But in those 6 weeks, I was just thinking, okay, what's the single most important thing to pick your next startup for, apart from your co-founder? But because that is a really, really important thing if you decide to do it with a co-founder. But it's picking a problem with properties that you want to work on for a long time. And so, for example, I learned that with the point of sale system. It's a lot of fun if you visit a little store in Soho, but it's a lot less fun to implement all US tax regulations. And we've all done similar stuff. Like it's going to be part of that problem for a long time. Of course, you can like shove it into somebody else. But if you really want to do something for a long time because you like it so much, then you're going to win, because that's a really great weapon. Because a lot of people do something with a horizon of 1 or 2 years, and they're never going to be as good at it as you just plan for it to do it for a really long time. So I think that is the most important thing, that, you know, when you think about it, like, make sure, if you have the luxury, make sure that you pick a problem with the properties that you really, really like working on. For a tool, obviously, the best property is people make things with it. So you see the work, and that's the best thing for me. Great side effect, people learning JavaScript is also very fulfilling. And those two things are enough to make it, for me, the best problem to work on.
Let's move on to the last question in the back. It's your honor.
Thank you. Thank you for such a inspiring talk.
Thank you.
Recently, I read an opinion from another young, very successful entrepreneur over the internet. He advised all the young people to drop their work on corporate and enterprise, because he say that working on enterprise really kills your talents. And so advise all the guys to start hacking around before they find what they really want, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your thought? How long you might hacking around before you need to start thinking about your financial stability?
Yeah.
Advice.
Yeah, I don't have like a super cool personal story about that, because I just rolled into something and I stuck with it and it ended up well, so I really like it now. But, you know, I read the Paul Graham stories, for example, and I know that he really thinks that you need to take some time in between to discover what you like. And I think creatively, like in the beginning of your career, you're just a little bit more open-minded and you have more time to explore these concepts. Although I also still feel that the cliche of becoming older and wanting to stop learning didn't really apply to me yet, so I can't really speak to that side. But, you know, I guess I'm probably never gonna get in a fight with somebody for advising that you need to explore early on in life with many different things. So yeah, that would probably be a good idea. I think enterprises, honestly, are also a pretty good experience, probably even also early on in your career, as long as you don't get stuck. Like I have friends that used to be really good, now they're and they know who they are, so I'm not sure if this is going to record it, but you're stuck for 5 years at Facebook, leave that place, man, and learn something new, right? It's if you get into like, if you stick at one place, and they'll always tell you, it's different every day, right? Like new people, and it's kind of true, but you know, you're in a certain environment, and the tasks that are at hand are very business driven most of the time. So the hard part is that these companies pay you so much that it gets pretty hard to leave, because I've seen a lot of very talented people start tying sort of their self-worth to the amount that they see come in every month. And that's where it gets really scary, because they seem to be in a phase where they used to do something really for fun and really enjoy it, and now they kind of start doing it for the money a little bit. And if that happened, if that would happen to me, to my work, I would lose something very precious in my life, because it's the thing that I enjoy most doing, and I don't want to start losing that. I don't want to not like doing it anymore. So that's my best advice for enterprises. I don't really care about like if you should do it when you're young or old, but if you do it, don't get stuck there.
Thank you for that answer. I think it's time to wrap it up for tonight. It's I think we've got some delay, but for good reason. I thought it was very inspiring. Maybe Nick and Rick, our sweet interview duo, can you want to wrap it up for tonight, or shall I do that?
Yeah, I'm a bit bummed out by the microphone. This one works. That one works.
This one works? Oh, it works.
Okay. Well,
I think this was a really, really nice conversation. Thanks a lot for sharing your experiences and your insights. I hope you all also got something out of it. I certainly did, and I think everybody else probably did as well. So I think we should all give a hand of applause.
Yeah.
Thanks
awesome.
a lot.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I think the bar is open, so let's all share stories. I think everybody here, we can also ask questions for the talks, because there wasn't any time. I think the speakers are still around, so ask them what you would have asked them. And yeah, I hope to see you guys. Well, Tim, when is the next one?
In March.
In March. So, see you all in March.
That's it.
And thanks for coming.
Thank you.